I have an actual relationship with the next guest, special tie, because I live in San Diego and I help run the San Diego Bitcoin meetup group. And our next guest actually started the first ever Bitcoin meetup group in the world that was known. He also is the founder of Plug and Play, and they help accelerate businesses through an incubator. They work with multiple partners like Capital One, BNP Paribas, Deutsche Bank, Credit Suisse, and Intuit, as well as many other institutions. Scott helped start the company in 2015, and his team has incubated or has launched plug and play accelerators in 24 different countries or regions. And it's actually quite an amazing feat for me to see the way that they have been able to progress in this industry and have really helped launch a lot of projects to move forward that, at least in the blockchain space, I've used and many people have used to this day. So big round of applause to Scott Robinson of Plug and Play. Thank you.
An introduction, thank you. Hello. Can I get a Bitcoin? No, that you're supposed to say that. So Bitcoin on 3, 1, 2, 3, Bitcoin. All right, come on, wake up. Let's wake up, folks. The afternoon is a long conference, but there's a lot to talk about. I'm talking about identity today. So with that, a quick overview of Plug and Play. We've been around since 2006. We've invested in about 750 startups. The companies that you know of include PayPal, Lending Club, Dropbox, and a few others. In the blockchain space, I've led about 50 total investments across the company. Those include Chronicled, Provenance, Stellar, Civic, Netkey, Nuco, and many more. But today I'm talking about something that's really dear to my heart, and this is identity. So right now, as we've seen across multiple services, different markets, identity is broken. And it's broken for many different reasons, but the first part is, well, it's not ubiquitous. Identity does not cross over borders. Just because you have a California driver's license doesn't mean that you can get accepted across in Mexico to drive. Further, we see a pretty important element of challenges right now on the security side. So a lot of the information that is personal to you has been shared with certain services over the years. Those services have been breached. And because of that, there's a lot of information about you that's easily accessible right now, which can quickly lead to problems. The third is, well, there's a lot of folks in this world that simply don't have any sort of identity. Lots and lots of folks that simply can't say, this is who I am and this is the service I should get because I live here, or that I bought this. And lastly, as we've seen across all these different services, your information as housed in one little small central node server somewhere, it's easily accessible, and from there, one breach leads to the rest. So talking about our problem with borders, this is just a quick example of things that we see on a daily basis. 22.5 million refugees on a global basis. This is old data too, this is 2016, so it's actually higher than that. And more importantly, about 10 million of these folks that have left their prior country going to the next actually don't have a place to live. They have no visa information, no credentials. We don't know who they are, what they do. And of course, there's millions more that will be displaced, and we can anticipate in the next 100 years, there's gonna be a lot more needing to move as it relates to some of the challenges that we're facing just on a global basis. So this is a quick snapshot of some of the breaches that we've seen just here in the United States from 2005 to now. So you can see it's a hockey stick, and this number will continue to go up as we continue to work on the same infrastructure. And this information is really important. So who here has a Yahoo account? Okay, a few of you. So if you remember when you signed up for Yahoo, they asked you a couple questions like, what's your mother's maiden name? Or what's your favorite car, your first car that you bought? Other folks like Equifax certainly are very relevant because, well, they have your transactional history, any credit line that you've pulled, of course, your Social Security if you're an American citizen. And lastly, when you swipe your card at Target, well, same information is being pulled through. So there's a really big problem, pervasive across all the service that you use on a daily basis. So what I want to talk about today is the reason why blockchain makes sense. So I'm setting the picture. Here's all the challenges that we're facing, and here's some of the features that we like about it. So I described some of the things that Yahoo might have asked you. Well, this is the same information that you may be queried against when you're trying to switch your phone. So for example, your birth date might be your passcode or your PIN to access that. Further, your street address, if you've ever tried to open up a new account, often you'll be pinged asking you questions like, hey, is 111 Forest Avenue your prior address or not? all that information is being pulled from a lot of these different on-ramping mechanisms. And so because of that, it's very easy to manipulate the identity. So for right now, I could spend $5 and create an identity fairly easily on something like Fiverr or some of the darknet marketplaces that are available. And these are core to our life. Let's think about this for a minute. Identity represents the ability for you to choose who's in office. It represents your ability to understand how many people are in a country. How do you take your funds and attribute them to certain services? And of course, when it comes time to going across borders, what we've seen, identity can also play a role. So most recently in China, for example, the national identity solutions may prohibit you from traveling between states. So stay in good behavior. This is a perfect example for which identity as a threat continues to be pervasive in the things that we use on a daily basis. So I'm going to use the telephone, your cell phone, as an example. Who here has two-factor? OK, you better switch soon. That's all I'll say about that. Two-factor is not something that was built in conjunction with the telecoms. This is effectively a mirror service. A third party pings your telecom pushes back only because it's the same phone number being used. There's not like some guy at AT&T saying, OK, well, this is Scott's phone. He just asked for this ping. Let's send it to that. The reality is actually if you do have two-factor, so I hope everyone after today downloads Google Authenticator, removes two-factor. This is what happened to me. So about 6 months ago, it's an afternoon, I pull up my phone and I notice emergency calls only, SIM card not located. And within 30 seconds, 20 different accounts of mine, Twitter, LinkedIn, Gmail, you name it, have already been swapped over. And of course, the reason why is because somebody at AT&T had approved a new SIM card to be placed on a new device. So when that device got that two-factor SIM question, hey, here's the code you need to enter the 6 digits, well, it was on the new device. And so any service that I had set up with two-factor was now easily taken over. And the point there is that that's a very centralized service for your identity. And guess what? It's going to happen to more people left and right. So if you can, provision your phone or at least try and set up Google Authenticator services locally. So as we kind of ask this question, why does this matter? Well, there's a lot of money in this space. And if you think about it, every single thing that you do as it relates to identity in one way or another is probably going to lead back to money. So for example, when we look at the different kind of offerings here, the economic value as it may relate to the reduced cost to serve. Well, this is friction points for you moving your services elsewhere. Reduced cost of fraud, so hello, tokenization and Apple Pay. Improved customer service, the ability to understand who that individual is despite the device. And of course, over time, having a longitudinal identity means you have a very good understanding of that consumer. Now, when you think about that in aggregate, that's a lot of money, and this is probably a very small number comparative to what we could see in the future. And further, when we think about the areas for which identity is actually being used, well, your identity is being used right now. Thanks for signing up today. We got your info on Eventbrite. And further, I can walk around here and pull your first name with your card in front. So the point is there's pretty much not a single scenario in which you're not doing something with identity. And of course, we can see this on the daily, which is in yellow, weekly, monthly, yearly, and infrequent over time as it frays out across this graphic. So there's been a lot of talk right now as it relates to what can the device do as it relates to your identity. And so I'll touch on some certain areas there, but we have seen solutions in market, whether it's blockchain or not, that are attacking this right now. Who here has heard of GDPR? Okay, a few of you. It's a huge problem right now. A lot of folks in the EU have to basically rationalize and leverage the ability to give provenance of how data is used and whether or not they actually have permission. So when that information crosses over an ocean, it's therefore illegal. So if you have a CRM and you're using stuff in Europe and the United States, good luck. We don't have a solution for that as of right now. The second big area that we think is really relevant is, well, identifying the actual biometrics related to that consumer. So I can look at a retina scan that's pretty hard to fabricate. Further, if I pair that with some sort of other biometric, whether it's my finger, a 3D scan of my entire head, there are many different layers for which you can build identity localized to that device. And of course, the secure element that sits on that device is unique to that piece. And it's very important that we recognize that you cannot really game a unique SIM card and a unique secure element on one single device. So when we wrap this back to why we're here today about blockchain, there's 4 really major features to blockchain technologies that make this highly relevant. So number 1, imagine no major government backing identity. This is pretty important to think about. So for example, when we invested in Civic, there was question as to which markets they would be going after. So certainly, if Google Ventures or somebody of the United States origin invested, it would be very difficult for somebody like Civic to be ubiquitous globally, particularly in markets like Russia, elsewhere like China and further, places like India. At the same time, we also see the need for this information to be available to anyone on read access. So perhaps this is an easy way to kind of transfer this concept of provisioning as it may relate to a smart contract. And then when you look at the stack, depending on, again, the type of blockchain that's being used, the fact that it can be immutable. And you could timestamp certain solutions against the services that have been rendered. So for example, the on-ramping mechanism that Deutsche Bank uses could be referenced for BNP as I'm trying to sign up here at Bank of the West in California. So that's a very interesting problem, many different competitive entities there, but the point is it's removing the friction. It's creating a flow that was unavailable before. And today, if you get a chance, check out Civic. Now, I am an investor in the company, but they did release a wallet service today that allows you to take Civic Coin and transfer it across all of the different onboarding mechanisms that they have. So when we think about identity further with blockchain, other areas become very important. So for example, the ability to have a line of sight where your information is, so controls when it comes to your information. Second, you don't have to necessarily house the information in the blockchain, you just have to point towards it. So for example, you could hash all the information on one of the onboarding documents, reference that as a Merkle tree entry into one of the blockchains, and then over time, as that information is pointed to a particular service or a particular application, you could have information longitudinally of what your identity is. And further, when we get back to this concept of centralization versus decentralization, well, the concept of taking one node versus many seems very attractive from a security perspective. And because of that, as we watch smartphone penetration on a global basis and engagement that follows with that, the general attributes to blockchain as it relates to identity become much more clear. Of course, there's a lot of questions as to why we would not want to use blockchain. So one that was very consistently referenced is the idea of revocable access. What if I don't want my information housed somewhere that I want to pull it back? For example, you're working with a particular business, they have your information, you stop services. You do not want them to try and remarket you. There are many different use cases for which you would want revocable access. So for example, perhaps even voting. You may only want to append your information for a certain period of time for which the government may validate that this is, yes, correct, this is your vote. Further, the idea of having a longitudinal identity could also present a lot of problems. So certain secrets or information that you wouldn't want to have public, or perhaps even comps as it relates to your overall performance. That could be very important to you, very private information. And then, of course, the idea that this would perhaps be recognized by 3 or 4 other sovereign states. This is a big challenge right now. And then lastly, if you lose your device, if anybody has Google Authenticator set up with something like a Coinbase or otherwise, you know how difficult it is to go all the way back, pull that unique share key, and get that secret posted back up. So the point is, it's not quite known as to what the implications might be, but it does have a lot of promise. So we can see in the market today, there's many different projects relating to identity. I walked past one, Usecoin, right around the corner here. From a top-down level, which is what I would usually gauge for market adoption, we've seen large telecoms, we've seen large entities like IBM and others, as well as nonprofits moving towards this space. So this is very important to see all these folks colluding together, building a better identity. And so I want to just quickly point out why Civic is interesting to us, what we saw in the company, and why it might be relevant today. So first off, just like any other service, Google, LifeLock, otherwise, you have secure ID. In other words, you can use this as a login function. Lastly, you can reuse the KYC solutions across your services. And third, it also scrapes against some of the different traditional services, like where your information is being used for lending and so forth. Another company that we invested in called Netkey has been pushing forward a different way. So they instituted BIP75, which is an improvement protocol solution. Effectively, it's meant to kind of build on the infrastructure side in the Bitcoin network. So they've been very relevant as it comes to ICOs and others. So with this being said, in conclusion, the market is asking for a ubiquitous solution. The pull method, meaning that the information that is used typically, whether it's through your transaction on your phone or your card, and otherwise is failing. That means it's being taken along for a ride where anybody else can look at it. And when we think about all the different markets that would be interested in something like identity, well, that makes a lot of sense for something like a blockchain. And lastly, just like Bitcoin and other blockchain solutions, this is built for the people. It's built for your identity. So with that, I'm very excited about this space. I can answer more questions afterward, but hopefully this gives you a good idea of why blockchain would be relevant for identity and the new paradigm that's coming in the next 15 to 20 years. Thank you.